How high would Keyonte George go in a way too early 2023 NBA draft redraft? Find out next on Locked On Jazz.
You are Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Jazz. Leif Thulin with you here again. As always, excited to be with you, joined by Richard Stayman. You guys know me. You're starting to know him. I'm a lifelong Jazz fan who's worked as a credentialed draft analyst for Locked On NBA Big Board, attendee of the 2023 Combine, Jazz broadcast assistant, statistician, and lover of college basketball, which has put me in a pretty good position to tell you how I feel about some of these draft prospects along this process where I've hosted for you, and now how I think they'll fare in the NBA, which, as you guys know, I adore as well. So Richard's joining me again, Locked On NBA Big Board co-host along with me and, of course, Rafael Barlow. Richard, overall great guy, unfortunately a Mavericks fan, though. But he's here for the ride, but I think he'll give a unique perspective on some of these prospects, because I've told you guys how I feel about a lot of them, where I'd rank them along the process. So there may be some back and forth between Richard and I as to where we'd rank them, where Keyonte George is. If you guys listened the other day, every day, thank you. We talked about Keyonte George and our expectations for year one and in the future. And Richard and I differed a bit there. So as I mentioned just a second ago, thank you again and always for making Locked On Jazz your first listen each and every day. And remember, Locked On Jazz is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube, which we're trying to grow at Locked On Jazz, which the best way to help us grow is to comment anything below. Today's question is, how many All-Stars will there be from this draft class? I'll probably ask Richard that one as well. And as you see below, today's show is brought to you by Bird Dogs, and I'm rocking my Bird Dogs hat I've been living in recently. I've been golfing in it. I've been playing tennis in it. And today I just commentated a soccer match outside in it because I didn't want to get sunburned. Anyway, Richard and I are going to talk some ball, and we're going to talk about the draft, which is something we really love. And we're going to talk about what different tiers there are in the first segment. How high does Keonte have to be to infiltrate this type of tier? Second segment, we'll continue our redraft. We're going to go just do the lottery. In the final segment, we're going to finish the redraft and talk about maybe does Taylor Hendricks infiltrate it, even if we think, like we said the other day, that he may be on limited minutes. All right, let's dive right in. Richard, how are you?
I'm good. It's good to be back, even if you roasted me for half of that, but it's good to be back.
Hey, what's a little friendly banter, man? Like, you have to have it. Richard's a sharpshooter. I'll give him that. Okay, so speaking of sharpshooters, there are some good shooters in the top. What's the tier that you have to say is just out of reach unless something very impressive happens for Keyonte George? Like, what is your tier that he can't quite approach, regardless of your high expectations that we talked about yesterday?
Yeah, I don't know if... I think if his, like you're talking, like if he hits his best outcome, like where does he go in a redraft kind of things? That's how I'm looking at it.
Yeah, that, and then just is there a place that's not attainable for him? Because this is a good draft class.
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things with Keyonte George was always going to be high-level shot maker. And with that, I think he's kind of capped out as like the fourth or fifth best player, and that feels kind of generous, just because he would really have to be an efficient shot maker, like, and be able to be a good ball handler, playmaker. His defense would have to, he has the tools to be a good defender, but he has to really be successful in that regard. I think everything has to go right for him to get there. But, and that's mostly because of his archetype, right? He's an undersized combo two guard that doesn't really hang his hat on one particular thing in any one area. But ultimately, I think, would it shock you if he's like something like 6th man of the year contender, the same way Lou Will was, and like things like that? Or Jordan Clarkson, staying local, if I may. But also, you could see something like the highest, most optimistic version. If he gets to that top 5 range, he's made an all-star game at that point. That's kind of where I would go with both draft position and just what the role looks like.
All right, so let's just name a few players from this last class and tell me if there's a possibility to surpass them. I'm gonna start at the top. Wembanyama. I think he's in this tier that's probably pretty much impossible to attain for Keyonte George, just
Correct.
based off his archetype. Let's go in order of where they're drafted as opposed to our big boards. Brandon Miller. Do you think Keyonte George can approach Brandon Miller
in a redraft? Yes.
Okay. I agree a little bit. I don't think he catches Scoot Henderson though, who I've had too, ahead of Brandon Miller throughout the entire process.
Correct. And I agree with that.
Okay, now here's where it gets a little interesting, but I think we're going to have a delineation in 2 picks, but at least there's an argument I could see happening at 4. So at 4, Amen Thompson went to the Rockets. We're redrafting just on who they are as players, not necessarily where they're drafted. Like, so if we're picking later on in this, we're not necessarily saying this is who they should have picked fit wise, like some people do years in advance when they redraft again. But I think Amen Thompson's hard to pass. I think there's a way in which Keyonte George is in a similar tier. I just think it's hard for him. His upside doesn't quite loom as large as Amen Thompson's, or for that matter, Osar's, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think he could surpass Asar. That's a big question mark for me though, because I've just been in general a little bit lower on him than I think than most. The playmaking is nice. I think we saw a lot of flashes of it in summer league, but again, my main concern for those who didn't know this was he did not create for himself in the half court against OTE. How does that scale up? And then the jump shot. Yeah, he's better than his brother at shooting Asar, but that's not the highest bar. So those 2 things I really need to see. Summer league was nice, and obviously the feel for the game is so strong that he'll make up for some areas, but I think he's got limitations, and ultimately I do think Amen is probably an unattainable ceiling for Keonte to surpass. Asard is like realistic.
I'm a little bit higher on Osar. I think the issue for him is that he's playing with 2 on-ball guards, and I think that limits his potential. That said, I think he's going to be an all-defensive team player pretty much from the get-go. Like, I doubt he gets it as a rookie, but I think he's going to be regarded as such. And then offensively, I think with more opportunity, I think he's going to be better than people think. So to me, that's where the delineation is. I think there's a top 5 that's pretty hard to attain. I do have one player that I think is going to end up ahead of Keyonte George that we haven't mentioned yet, and I'm assuming we'll have him here. I wonder if you have him in a different tier. What do you make of Jarris Walker?
So I had him as my 6th ranked player in 2023, but I think that's tough. If everyone's hitting their ceiling, I think Jarris Walker is going to finish above Keyonte George.
So that's the thing. I think Keonte George is more likely to hit his absolute ceiling than Jarris Walker, but I think Jarris Walker has more outcomes that are better than Keonte George's most likely ones. Like it's if he hits his 80%, his 80% is better than Keonte George's 80%, and that's where I think, to me, that's where the delineation is. So spin it however you want in terms of order. Like Richard mentioned, Brandon Miller was the 2nd pick. There's a way Keonte could pass him. I agree, but I think those 6 picks, if I were to redo the draft, those would be my top 6. Would you agree with that, regardless of order?
I don't think there's enough evidence to change it. My big board, I personally, I'd still put. I had Taylor Hendricks over Jarris Walker, so I put Taylor in there. I don't have a problem with the other guys, though. I mean, I get it. Like, it's not exactly how my big board went, but I get it.
Well, Jazz fans would be all right with that as well. And we're going to talk some more Taylor Hendricks. Let's talk about what has to happen for Keonte to infiltrate the top 5, because I don't think that's impossible. Like, we're potting him as probably 7th here, and we'll talk about our actual picks in the next segment. But just give me a breakdown of what type of player do you think, both numerically and just the archetype of player? We know he's going to be a score first point guard, a combo guard, but what type of numbers does he have to put out by year 3, by year 5, year 7 to warrant top 5 or to warrant top 7? And what's the difference?
Yeah, one of 2 ways for me is I think he has to either be an elite 6-man kind of thing, like already into that role, or he's going to probably, I think year 3 flirt with 20 points a game, and that's probably going to be like 18 points a game, 3 to 4 assists a game, and be efficient shooting. Like, you can't be at 43%. You got to be 45 plus. I think that's the bar, and it's that simple.
And so if this were to be done like 10 years from now, there's going to be a point where people say, well, how many all-stars does this have? And it gets dicey. Do you think Keonte George has all-star potential?
Yes, because if you're a dynamic shot creator at all 3 levels, like Keonte George in theory is, yeah, especially at that size, like it's tough, but also we've seen guys pull it off. Like, he's what, 6'4", 6'5", honestly, maybe even 6'3", but like he's somewhere in that window. It's not impossible, but everything does have to go right for him to be
Alrighty.
an
So
all-star.
I agree. And I think the only player, there's two players in that list that I think have a possibility of having impact that's great, even if their individual stats preclude them from being an all-star. And that would be Jarris Walker and Osar Thompson, both of whom I think have higher absolute ceilings, but they're less likely to attain than Keyonte George, but their 80% outcomes are better than Keyonte George's 80% outcomes. So I think it's fair to group them in. So we're going to continue our redraft. We're going to talk about the players that are in this tier. Are there any other players that Richard would take over Keyonte George? Because I've told you guys before I'd put Keonte 6th or 7th. I think I'd take him 7th on this given day. But first, let's talk about bird dogs. I mentioned at the outset, I am rocking my bird dogs hat. I've been wearing it for hours as I commentated soccer. I wore it yesterday to play golf. I wore it a couple days before that to play tennis. I've been living in my bird dogs shorts, which I wore to play basketball today. And I wore them to play golf, a different pair. And Bird Dogs has been awesome, giving us some gear. And you'll be gifted with some extra gear as well with the purchase of Bird Dogs. Awesome pants. I haven't worn the pants yet. I don't know if you have, Richard. They look awesome. I'm excited. Bird Dogs truly make you look great. Like that's the fit is awesome on all types of bodies, all types of legs. If they're long or they're short, they really fit and give you a sculpted look. They have stretch khaki shorts that are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg and giving you a truly sculpted look. Bird Dog shorts do the exact same thing as Lululemon, but fit way better, and they fit for any occasion. And only yesterday, like I mentioned, I golfed and then play basketball. So that's the testament right there in the same pair of shorts. Bird Dogs does a great job mixing up the different attire, both for, picnic, barbecue to basketball where you sweat, or you could even wear them to swim. So they're versatile. And like I mentioned, the hat's my favorite too. Go to birddogs.com/lockedonnba or enter promo code LockedOnNBA at checkout for a free Bird Dogs water bottle with your order. That's birddogs.com/lockedonnba for a free water bottle at checkout. You won't want to take your Bird Dogs off, we promise you. And I truly recommend it as highly as possible. Welcome back, Richard. We are drafting the 2023 NBA draft. And yes, they have not played any regular season games. I know it's a peculiar exercise, but a lot of interest for this Jazz franchise right now is, okay, how good can Keyonte George get? Because we think we've got a guard of the future. The last time the Jazz felt this way, they had Donovan Mitchell, and they proved to be right. He just ended up getting traded, and the Jazz are rebuilding, and they're reaping the rewards of that trade with Lowry, Markkanen, and a few other assets. So however you want to spin it, Richard and I named off 6 players that are ahead of Keyonte George. And Keontae's my 7, so it'll be Richard's pick for number 7. The players that are off the board are Victor Wembanyama, Brandon Miller, Scoot Henderson, Amen and Osar Thompson, and lastly, Jarris Walker. And I have taken Keyonte George at number 7. Richard Stayman, who are you taking?
Yeah, and I want to emphasize, I am not making a lot of changes. Like I'm boring. I've been very conservative about just the reactions I personally have had to Summer League and takeaways. And I don't mean to make you sound like reactionary, because I know you're not. But for me, I'm sticking with at 7th the guy who I put 5th on my board, and that's Taylor Hendricks, who happens to be, I'm kind of going out of order for you here. But I think for me, it's just that 3-and-D power forward is such a unique role, especially one with a feel for the game like him and passing vision like him at the size he is. I just feel like it's very unique, and it's going to get him a lot more places than the average 3-and-D player.
So, I mean, Jazz fans are probably aren't going to be like not happy with that. That's going to be awesome. What type of player, if he ends up 7th in a redraft, let's just say down the road, and you're right, what type of player do you envision? Because we talked about on the podcast the other day that our expectations are tempered for year 1. Year 2, we hope he plays a bigger role. Year 3 is when we said we hope he starts, and that all depends on John Collins and different health predicaments. But if you're going to be number 7 in a redraft, you're going to have to be a very good starter. What level of player do you predict Hendricks to be then?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I feel like he, the value that, say, Jabari Smith had that made him a candidate to go number 1. I think he provides a lot of that. You look at a two-way forward, he's got versatility, he can pass, he can defend multiple positions, he can defend the perimeter and the rim at a high level. Like, to me, that is something where not a lot is going to change from year 1 to 3 in terms of what he does. It's going to be volume at that point. And I feel like he's going to be a quickly efficient shooter, also a good rim protector. He averaged the most blocks per game in the conference, more than Jarris Walker. I think he's somebody who is just tailor made, no pun intended, because I heard myself say that, tailor made for the NBA though. In all seriousness,
I think I believe, and every dayers may be able to fact check this. I think I said for him to warrant the 9th pick, even with a maybe lesser role initially for the Jazz, I expect him by year 3 to be a starter, by year 4 to be part of a team that's building for a real contending spot and be a guy who's capable of scoring 15 to 17 points, play good defense, and grab you 7-8 boards. So I agree. I have more questions as to the ability to get there as soon as possible. So that's your 7th pick. I'll go 8, and we're not looking at each other's boards here. Number 8 for me, and I think this would be a steal at 8, would be Anthony Black. Anthony Black to me is in a weird situation in Orlando, but he looked like with NBA spacing, everything that you wanted from a guard who has playmaking and defensive chops. Look to be the part in the summer league level. We'll see how his shooting translates with the NBA spacing and the impetus being put on him to be a scorer as well as a facilitator. But I think they took him at 6, and I don't think that's a mistake. So taking him at 8, I think is a good location. How about you?
yeah, he was my next available. I would have taken him too. You look at somebody who is just so advanced at such a young age, and he's also raw, especially on the defensive end. Like, he's not raw in the defensive end, but he's advanced there, and then he's raw in other areas like turnovers. He mightily struggles with. I'm from Dallas. He's from Duncanville, which is which actually is just a few miles south of me where I'm at currently. And I got to see him when he was in high school, and the turnovers have always been an issue. He had turnover issues at Arkansas. He had turnover issues at Summer League. He had turnover issues at Duncanville. Once he gets past that hurdle in a couple years, I think that is what's really going to make a breakout for him. So I love his game. I warmed up to him very late. I thought he was kind of more of an idea than an actual prospect, but you watch his defense, he's a massive, impactful player. Like, at a minimum, you got a positive defender that is athletic towards the rim. And Arkansas spacing was so bad. You kind of hinted at it with the NBA spacing. I really think he's going to shine. And also Orlando's added more shooters, I think, and being able to play with just a real NBA offense is going to do him lots of wonders.
So for those counting, I've taken Keyonte George, Richard at 7 in the same pick. He also took a Jasmine. He took Taylor Hendricks. So that means Keyonte George is still on the board for Richard. For me, he is gone. At 9, I think there's a delineation of talent. I think this is where the draft descends in talent. And there's either you take guys with big upsides or you take someone you think is projectable. And I'm going to take a guy with an upside swing here that I think has a role where he's going to be a role player early, but he's got a chance to be very impactful. I'm going to go with Derek Lively Jr. at number 9. I don't think that's going to be the most popular pick in this, but my rationale is essentially he's going to play a role immediately, be a anchor defensively. I know he's often compared to Tyson Chandler. Now Tyson Chandler's on the Maverick staff. He was a Maverick, but I really think he can play a role similar. He's going to impact shots. He's going to dunk the ball. He's going to play within himself defensively, alter shots around the rim, be able to slide. And I really believe in impact at this point being very important. Like, you don't have to be an all-star to be the 9th best player in a draft. You have to be someone who's impactful for a winning team. And I think he can really help a team win, especially when their best player is Luka Doncic.
Yeah, I'm not as high on Derek Lively personally. I do see the light a little bit, but he's got such a long way. I don't think he plays much this year, to be honest. Like, he's still in summer league. He had a hard time adjusting to the speed of guys' shots at the rim, right? Where he would jump, and what maybe in college had been a block, he was late and the ball was already off the backboard, and at best he goaltends. So for me, I think he's got a little bit of ways to go. He's got some learning curves to go over. I think though, if he can master that role and, utilize touch, that was also an issue, I think, in summer league and really in Duke. It was a major concern. If those two things can get improved quickly, and it's not just rushed improvements, it's like genuine improvements that happen fast because he gets it, I'm way more sold personally. I have him not in the lottery in a redraft.
All right. So who are you taking at 9 then?
I'm going Bilal Coulibaly. He's somebody who I wish I was higher on my final ranking. I put him 16, but I think he's going to be tough to keep off these re-ranks. And also it doesn't hurt him that he's going to be playing for a team where he has tons of freedom. So I like his game. I don't really remember his summer league stats, to be honest.
They were pretty pedestrian. They didn't shock anyone.
Yeah. I feel like, though, he might take a minute to get warmed up. Maybe like till December. He might be, riding the bench a little bit heavy. But you look at somebody who can just be this very versatile two-way wing. He's like not even a wing. He's like a true small forward. I feel like that's got a lot of value. So he's somebody I would put at the next spot.
All right, we'll do number 10 in this segment, then we'll move on to the rounding out the lottery. Number 10 for me, I was between Bilal Coulibaly and this guy, both sensational athletes. I'm going to go with Cam Whitmore from Villanova. He's with the Rockets. I'm a little lower on Whitmore than I was entering the draft. Obviously, the knee injury, but my concern is more the way he played in Summer League. It was like him versus the world, and I think there's a place for that. In terms of like the Summer League's ugly, like muck it up. If you're able to score in that ugly situation, then there's something to be said. I think its talent is undeniable, but I do think there's going to be questions about how he plays with teammates, especially with a direction of the Rockets now being altered as they've brought in a few veterans. So that's my 10th pick. Who are you taking number 10, and does he play for the Utah Jazz?
No, but I agree. Though the talent, like I was very high on Cam Whitmore. I had him number 5 probably till the combine. And then I started realizing, watch the coaching staff when he takes a shot at Villanova. Generally, you're going to see something like, what was that? Like questioning what he was doing. And you saw that in Summer League where a 3-on-1 for him was an opportunity for him to shoot the ball every single time. You could count on one hand some games how many times he passed. And that is concerning. Again, there's a time and a place. Generally, the time is Summer League or the place is the G League. Those are two places that do encourage that in some ways. But how he does that in a true NBA environment that needs to focus on winning basketball, I think he's got a little bit of a way to go to get there. It's not to say he can't do it, but I really do think he has to just refurbish how he plays. And that's just not going to happen overnight. I'm a little bit lower on him. Now, if we are talking pure upside, yeah, give me the ticket for him. I would have gone personally, if you don't mind me spilling the beans, Cason Wallace.
Okay. What's the rationale here with Cason at 10?
Which
is where he was taken.
Yeah, he's a safe pick. So I actually completely forgot about that. But for me, he's going to be a stud on defense, active hands. He's going to force turnovers. He can also shoot the ball, and I think he's got a lot of room to grow there. And he's quick. Think he can run a clean pick and roll. He had no pick and pop, man. Like Kentucky always hides their guards. I mean, always kind of struggle to find where the hiding is. For me, it's the fact that they had one roll man ever. They only used him and Oscar. That was always the pick and roll. Oscar's pick and pop extends to the free throw line. In the NBA, he's going to have Chet Holmgren. Honestly, whatever lineup you want to put out there, Aaron Wiggins runs the 4. I'm throwing some deep cuts with him, but they're going to have the pick and pop opportunities where the floor is spaced and he gets the shooters where he did not have that at Kentucky. And I think he's going to look a lot better as a playmaker. So that's really my rationale with him.
All righty. Well, we'll see if Richard has Keyonte George in the rounding out the lottery. We'll see if I have Taylor Hendricks rounding out the lottery. We're talking about if these guys hit versus if they if we're playing safe, and we're talking about different rationales in between. So sometimes you're going to see reasons be different for the two of us because we evaluate differently, but I think it gives you a good perspective of how teams are going to value these players down the road, at least the way we project them to. But before we talk about if Sensabaugh, Hendricks, or Keyonte George ends up in the tail end of the lottery for Richard and myself, we're talking about Murdoch Hyundai here in Utah. Murdoch Hyundai has been in Utah for over 80 years. Hyundai is the best car for your money with safety features, bells, whistles, and all in amazing colors and prices. It's they're all standard edition. They're phenomenal. The SUV lineup features the Kona, the Tucson, the Santa Fe, the Palisade, and the Ioniq 5 electric was named the Motor Trend SUV of the Year by Motor Trend this year. And that new Ioniq 6 is even better. It's electric, looks just like a Porsche, and just won the World Car of the Year. So, there's some prize, there's accolades to the name, and plenty of testimonials from normal people like me and you to claim these are phenomenal cars. 3 locations, Linden, Murray, and Logan. So go get yourself a Murdoch Hyundai. And as always, go Jazz. Thanks for making Locked On Jazz your first listen. And with your second, perhaps tune into, Richard Stayman, because he's phenomenal. But there is a question here. Richard, where is Keyonte George? Because we talked about how he could be an all-star. How low does he fall for you? Because we're on pick 11. We'll go to you first here.
Well, I want to emphasize something. He's going to go higher. If I had to re-rank my board, he moves up.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not a knock on him. I had him 25th. So seeing him in here would be an upset. I'm going back and forth after every pick of, do I put him there? And I don't know. I'm going back and forth. We'll just have to find out and see.
All right. So who is 11 then?
Yeah. So for 11, for me, I was going to say, I think this would actually put, right, Cason Wallace.
So you had Cason at 10.
Oh, that was 10. Yeah. Yep. You're right. I would put Grady Dick here. I agree with you. The tier around 8 is where it falls. I get it.
I disagree.
I get it. He didn't look great in Summer League. The Raptors had the worst Summer League team. It was a terrible spot for him. I'm still holding hope. I think he's going to be a great shooter. I'm not changing what I feel like he does everything the right way on offense, with or without the ball. I think he's going to find a lot of success in a Toronto system that favors those kind of guys.
I think his upside is minuscule compared to Keyonte George.
That's fair.
I also think that Keyonte George is just as good a shooter as Grady Dick because he does it differently. But you know what? To each their own. We've battled this one back and forth in person a couple times, but I wish we had more time, but we do have to keep it rolling. So I'll give you my 11th pick. My 11th pick is Bilal Coulibaly. I think at a certain point you got to take some upside in these picks, and I think Coulibaly, like you accurately mentioned, will be given the opportunity, which is essential early in his career to have the ball in his hands and do a lot. Who do you have at 12?
I'm having some second thoughts, but I think it's going to be Kobe Buffkin. I think he's somebody that, like, we've seen the rumors about the Trae Young stuff, and I think there's very legitimate. So, like, just I don't think that's smoke. I think there's there's legitimacy to that. And if he's gone, I kind of think DeJounte Murray may be gone, and they just clean house of clutch guys. And suddenly Kobe Buffkin's there. And I think he has a lot of upside just in general, being such a young sophomore. Like, if I'm not mistaken, he was 19 on draft night.
Yeah, he was.
And I feel like there's no holes in his game. He's good at a lot of stuff. He's not great at any one thing just yet, but he has a really good chance to get there. So I love the idea of Kobe Buffkin breaking out in a post Trae Young era in Atlanta. And I think that post Trae Young era could be honestly before 2026. So he'd still be on his rookie contract.
All right. Well, if that happens, I think opportunity is the key word there. Number 12 for me, I'm going to go with Cason Wallace. I think Cason Wallace fell to a spot in Oklahoma City with the trade, the Mavericks trading, knowing that they could get Lively at 12. That really behooves the way he plays. It puts no pressure on him to score out of system. He's going to score attacking closeouts, hitting open shots. He can run pick and roll. He can operate as a backup guard to Shea. He can work as a 2-guard complementing Shea. I think that's a very good landing spot for him. I think his potential is a bit lower than some people, but I think his floor is pretty high, and he fell in the right spot. All right, so we're at 13. Richard has a couple players that are notably missing here. If you're listening as a Jazz fan, considering we talked about Keonte, this is being a guy that could be an all-star. I had Keonte 7, but in fairness, Richard had Taylor Hendricks at 7, and I haven't chosen him. Do either of us choose in our final 2 picks here a Jazz player? Richard, at 13, your pick is?
I think now I'm going to stop the slide. Keyonte George is off the board. You've convinced me with the upside. I can see it. All right. Because again, he was 25th on my final pre-draft board.
Yeah. Well, so here's the thing. You said he could be in year 3 pretty feasibly 18-4. I think 18-4 by year 3 is going to land him in the top 10. And that's if he hits it. But I'm just
That's
saying.
yeah. That was under the assumption he hits this year. I'm not that optimistic that does happen. That's why he's so low, to be fair.
I think many people, I think that's probably close to what he is. I actually think that's possible. I think his ceiling could be higher. I think a lot of Jazz fans listening to this will be like, wow, what are you talking about? Because we think he can be an all-star, because the last time we had a player score this much was Donovan Mitchell. I don't think he's quite got the athletic traits that Donovan Mitchell had, because Donovan Mitchell, by the time his rookie year ended, was the lead rookie three-point shooter ever. That record has since been broken, but he was a very good shooter. And he was a phenomenal athlete. And Keyonte George is an above average athlete, maybe at the NBA level, because he's got this twitchiness. He's above average at the point guard position. All right, at 13 for me, I've got a player that I was very high on throughout the process. He played very well in the summer league. He went number 33 in the draft. That's Leonard Miller. I think he's going to well outplay his projection. Leonard Miller was, I couldn't believe he didn't go in the first round. He was a man amongst boys in the G League. Well, he was a boy and they were all men. And now he's going to the NBA, and I think it's going to be easy for him. I think he's going to find his way into a role in Minnesota for a team that sometimes needs athleticism to pair with some of their backup bigs. Like, you're going to see them play big lineups. He can complement play on the interior. He can play on the outside. Shot's a little funky, but if it improves slightly, you're getting a talent that was once regarded as a top-notch talent with ball handling skills, and now he turned himself into a motor-first player. I'm really high on Leonard Miller.
I really like him. I was torn on putting him in my last spot.
All right, 14, Richard Stayman to round out his lottery.
I'm debating. Do I butter up the entire fan base here
and take Bryce Sensabaugh?
I mean, like, because there is a legitimate path. Like, here's where I'm at. There is a legitimate path. We talked about this the other day when we talked about all the Jazz rookies that they picked. Not every single rookie, but one of the things we said was, tough shot making. There's defensive tools. Like, there is and he's an elite shooter. There's a legitimate path for him to be a lottery return value. But at the same time, how likely is it? And also there's a few other guys, like, he's in this weird tier where it's like, yeah, but so could he, is what you say about, like, everyone else here. And I have a two-way tie. Like, I'm going to go with probably Bryce Sensabaugh because of that. And I did have him at one point higher than
you had him top 10 at one point, right?
I had him 10, exactly.
Yeah.
So I should go with who I had higher on the final pre-draft board, which would be the other person. And this person's on the Nets, but I'm going to go against my gut and not pick Dariq Whitehead, because I do think if everyone's healthy, Dariq Whitehead return. Like, it was only because of injury he slipped. Nothing to do with his skill.
And do you still have Whitmore on the board?
Yeah, I'm passing up. I'm doing what everyone did on June 23rd. Gotcha. Or whatever night. I think that's what night it was. And yeah, I'm taking Bryce Sensabaugh.
All right. Well, a Jazz man rounds out Richards. He's got all three Jazz players, which really bodes well. If that happens, the Jazz will certainly be happy. And I actually am taking Taylor Hendricks at 14. I had this on my draft, and I'm not doing this to butter up Jazz fans. As you guys know, I am a diehard fan, but I have been pretty clear on my takes about these different players. I think Hendricks has the archetype that's going to be very coveted in the NBA. So value to me is going to be added by what he can do that is rare, because he'll be a secondary rim protector alongside Walker Kessler, who can space the floor. He shot 39% as a freshman. He's a tremendous athlete, does not need the ball to score, doesn't need to score to impact the game. And when you're contending like the Jazz are expecting to do, and I expect the Jazz to do in a couple years, you're going to need a player like that. And if you're building your roster in terms of not statistics compiled, but in terms of what player gives us the best chance to win, I think Taylor Hendricks has a better chance to be in the lottery than he does based off statistics. That said, I gave you a real pitch a couple months ago about around draft day after the Jazz took him that I said, you know what, Taylor Hendricks will give you 17-9. They ended up trading for John Collins, and I think that changes his trajectory. But if he develops under John Collins, then he emerges as the starter by year 3, year 4. I still think that's completely feasible, and in which case I think he's likely a top 10 guy, and Richard had him top 10. So that'll do it for us, and as a fun exercise, hopefully the Jazz end up with as many representatives in a redraft in the lottery as we say, because that likely means the Jazz are going to be pretty good. So thank you for listening. As always, thanks for making Locked on Jazz your first listen. I'm looking forward to being back with you. I'm going to have some coaches that I'm trying to get a hold of to tell you about the Wild West, which is the the busy Western Conference, where I think there are 13 teams with enormous amounts of talent. Where do the Jazz stack up in the West? Does Will Hardy and the impressive rapport he's building and the cohesiveness of the Utah Jazz stand a chance against some of these talented rosters? Well, we'll find out in episodes next week. Thanks for Richard for hopping on, and check out him and Raphael, and maybe I'll be on there. I haven't been on as much recently after doing this on Locked on NBA Big Board for your next listen. And as always, you guys know what I'm going to say. It's going to be pretty repetitive, pretty redundant, but let's go Jazz.